In a fancy restaurant in the heart of New York City, under the warm golden lights and the soft melody playing in the background, a black woman walks in. She's simple, calm, and radiates quiet confidence. But instead of a welcoming smile, she's met with a cold, dismissive stare from the waiter. He ignores her completely, turning away to serve other customers as if she doesn't even exist. Was it because of her skin color or the plain dress she was wearing? If it were you, what would you do? Would you stay silent and swallow the humiliation or stand up for your worth? What the waiter doesn't know is that this woman is actually the real owner of the restaurant. A moment that seems small but becomes a spark that changes everything about pride, respect, and how people see each other. Have you ever been judged just because of how you look? Ever been ignored? Even when you knew you deserved to be heard? If you have, stay with me, because this story is one you'll never forget. Hit like, share, and subscribe, and let's dive into this emotional story. Waiter ignored black woman, regretted it when she was the restaurant owner. That night, New York City was wrapped in the soft velvet of autumn. The air was cool and damp, filled with the scent of dry leaves and car exhaust drifting through brightly lit streets. Beneath the glittering awning of the Elysian room, people strolled by slowly. A few limousines pulled up, drivers opened doors, and guests stepped out, dressed in sharp suits and gowns that floated like smoke. Inside, golden light spilled over the tables. Candle flames danced, their reflections shimmering on glasses of red wine. The faint clink of silverware blended with quiet laughter and a gentle jazz tune. Everything seemed perfect, at least, on the surface. Then the door opened, and a soft gust of wind swept in along with a woman. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair neatly tied up, no flashy jewelry, just an old silver watch on her wrist. Her name was Amara Williams, and anyone could tell. She wasn't here to show off. She stepped inside, calm and composed, her eyes quietly taking in the luxurious scene. But in that very moment, she felt something. Not warmth, but a wave of coldness. Glances, brief but sharp, passing over her enough for her to know she was being judged. Not because she didn't belong, but because of the color of her skin. The narrator's voice comes in softly. Sometimes, what makes us feel small isn't how big the room is, but how narrow the eyes around us can be. Amara stopped at the reception desk. She smiled politely, the kind of smile only those who've endured can still manage in an unwelcoming place. The host, a young man named Ethan Brooks, approached. He was tall, clean-cut, his practiced smile almost perfect, except for the chill in his eyes. His voice was warm, but carried a thin layer of condescension. "Good evening, ma'am. How can I help you?" Amara's tone was calm, deep, and steady. "I have a reservation for two, under the name Amara Williams." Ethan glanced at the list, skimmed through it, and looked up with a forced expression. "I'm afraid we're fully booked tonight." She tilted her head slightly. "I have a confirmation on my phone. Could you check again?" He gave a polite, empty smile. "Perhaps your system made a mistake. We don't seat guests without a verified reservation." Behind him, a white couple walked in. Instantly, Ethan's demeanor changed, his tone softened. His smile brightened. He greeted them warmly, ushering them to their seats, pouring their wine, pulling out their chairs. Not a single word of apology to the woman still standing at the door. Amara watched silently. No sigh, no anger. Just a faint flicker in her eyes, the light dimming for a second. She'd seen this before, in boardrooms, on the streets, even in spaces she herself had built. That silence, that quiet exclusion, it wasn't new, but it never stopped stinging. Around her, the beauty of the restaurant felt distant now. Another waiter passed by, avoiding eye contact. The music still played, but somehow it felt far away, as if the world itself had quietly closed its doors to her. The narrator's voice returns, soft and reflective. Not everyone gets served. Some are chosen to be tested. Amara walked toward a small table by the window and sat down. She didn't call for anyone. She didn't complain. She simply placed her purse on the table and looked out at the city lights shimmering beyond the glass. Outside, the wind pushed a few dry leaves against the window. In her mind, a voice echoed her mother's, from long ago. "Never let anyone tell you you're not good enough. If they can't see your worth, it's because their light is too dim." Amara smiled faintly, the kind of smile worn by those who have weathered many quiet storms. She didn't yet know that just a few hours later, this calm would silence the entire room. She didn't know that tonight, what seemed out of place would become the center of change. She sat there, heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the jazz. A black woman, a silent table, a crowded room where not a single person truly saw her. Outside, the restaurant sign shimmered in the glass reflection of the Elysian Room, where excellence is served. She looked at those words for a long moment. The corner of her lips lifted slightly. Excellence, but missing respect. And right then, you can feel it tonight. Won't just be another dinner. It'll be a confrontation between prejudice and dignity. The night carried on inside the Elysian Room, filled with elegant chatter and the soft clinking of fine glassware. Laughter rippled from tables that were never left waiting. At the corner of the room, Amara Williams sat alone. The chandelier light spilled across her table, fragments of gold glimmering on the polished surface. No one looked her way, or rather, everyone made a conscious effort not to. The door opened again, letting in a rush of cold air that smelled of city streets and faraway traffic. Ethan Brooks had just returned from seating a wealthy couple in the VIP section. He straightened his tie. The same perfect smile was still there, rehearsed daily, polished for presentation, but it had no soul behind it. Amara watched him glide across the room, confident, maybe a bit smug. The light caught his cheekbone, making his face look almost sculpted, like porcelain. When their eyes met, he hesitated just for a second, then turned away as if nothing had happened. The narrator's voice came low and steady. Some smiles aren't made to warm others. They exist only to remind someone that they don't belong. A young waitress, timid and uncertain, glanced toward Amara. She started to approach, but was stopped by Ethan's hand gesture. "Don't bother," he said under his breath. "She's probably waiting for someone. Might have come to the wrong place." Amara heard every word. Her ears burned, but her face didn't flinch. She took a deep breath and turned toward the window. The city lights reflected her image on the glass, small, quiet, surrounded by glitter she didn't ask for. She wondered why things like this still happened, even in a city that called itself the center of opportunity. She had faced worse boardrooms filled with doubt, streets lined with judgment, but somehow, tonight's small cruelty reopened old wounds. For a moment, she questioned if believing in people had been a mistake. Maybe she was naive to think the world had changed. A part of her wanted to walk out, but a stronger, quieter part told her to stay. At the next table, a man leaned toward his companion and whispered soft enough to sound secret, loud enough for her to hear, "Don't know why someone like her would even come in here." Amara didn't turn. She just smiled faintly, so faintly. She wasn't sure it counted as a smile. Moments later, Ethan passed by again, 2 glasses of wine balanced on his tray. He paused beside her table. She thought he might finally speak. But no, he set the glasses down at the next table and kept moving, his trained grin still shining. The narrator's voice came again, slow and deliberate. Disdain isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the act of simply refusing to see you. After a few long minutes, Amara stood up and walked toward the front desk. Her heels clicked on the marble floor, each step calm, precise, but echoing with the rhythm of a heartbeat held too long. Ethan was writing something on his tablet. When he noticed her, he looked up, faint impatience flickering in his eyes. "Ma'am, like I said, we only seek guests who have confirmed reservations." Her voice was gentle, her composure so steady it almost made him uncomfortable. "I understand, but I do have a reservation. Could you check one more time?" He sighed and shrugged. "The system doesn't make mistakes, ma'am. Maybe you're thinking of one of our other locations." She tilted her head slightly. "I'm not mistaken. This is the Elysian Room in Manhattan, isn't it?" He nodded. "Yes, but this isn't really a place for walk-ins." That sentence cut like a blade. For a moment, laughter stopped. A few guests lifted their heads. An older woman at the bar shook hers softly, as if embarrassed on his behalf. Amara met his eyes. There was no anger in hers, only a calm so sharp it was almost frightening. "You don't need to tell me where I belong," she said quietly. "I only asked because I know this restaurant very well." Ethan smirked. "Oh, really, yes," she replied. "Very well." Then she turned and walked back to her seat. The room grew heavier. Ethan shifted uncomfortably, pretending to check something on his tablet, sensing eyes on him. A man sitting nearby leaned toward Amara. "Don't let them get to you," he murmured. "I've seen this happen too many times." Amara smiled faintly. "I'm not hurt," she said softly. "I'm just thinking if people realize their behavior says more about them than anyone else, maybe things would be different." The man nodded, but said nothing more. Maybe he understood, or maybe something in her eyes kept him silent. She opened her phone and looked again at her reservation confirmation. Clear as day. Confirmed. Table for 2. 7:30 p.m. Below it, the restaurant's logo gleamed faintly in the light. She set her phone down and glanced around. The waitstaff moved briskly past her, attentive, polite, and efficient, with everyone else. The narrator's voice softened. There are thousands of restaurants in the city, but sometimes the place one must conquer isn't a dining room. It's prejudice itself. An hour crawled by. Amara still sat there, no water, no greeting, no acknowledgement. Ethan kept glancing her way, irritated. Maybe he thought she was trying to look like she belonged. He didn't know that the woman he dismissed was the very person who owned the place he served, that she was silently testing the culture she'd built with her own hands. The chandelier light glimmered across her face. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and exhaled slowly, eyes tracing the crystals above. She thought of others who had sat through the same kind of silence. Women, people of color, anyone ever seen through but never truly seen. Under her breath, she whispered one day, "They'll have to learn how to see people again." The jazz changed tempo slower now, almost mournful. A saxophone floated through the air, smooth but aching. Even the music seemed to recognize the chill that had settled over the room. Ethan looked her way once more, hesitation flickering. Maybe even he could feel the wrongness in the silence stretching between them. But instead of fixing it, he turned away again. Amara didn't move. No fury, just stillness and an idea slowly forming in her mind. Some lessons, she thought, can't be spoken. They must be shown. Tonight, that lesson was about to begin. The narrator's voice closed this chapter with a quiet echo. People often believe power lies with those who are served. But sometimes, true power sits quietly. At the table, no one dares to notice. Time moved as if someone had quietly slowed down the clock. Each minute became a drop of water falling onto the polished table where Amara Williams sat. The restaurant remained alive, the laughter, the shimmer, the music, but all of it felt distant, as though she existed in a parallel world, one where no one looked her way. No one felt the need to ask if she was all right. There was still no glass of water on her table. She smiled a quiet smile, not meant for anyone. The air grew thick, almost heavy. People say silence is golden. But in moments like this, silence feels more like a wall, one that divides human from human. Ethan Brooks passed by her several times, moving with the polished grace of a man confident in his place. Each time their eyes almost met, he looked away, pretended she wasn't there. Sometimes, it isn't cruel words that want the most, it's being seen through, like you were made of glass. Amara's gaze drifted toward the window. The reflection of skyscraper lights rippled across the thick pane of glass. Those golden streaks of light pulled her back to another time, a younger version of herself, 18 and full of dreams. Back then, she was a night shift waitress at a small diner in Brooklyn. Her shoes were worn thin, her hands rough from washing dishes in water that never stayed warm long enough. She could still remember her first night. The first customer to ever yell at her just because she spilled a few drops of coffee. Later, the manager had leaned over and whispered, "Learn to smile. Amara, waitresses don't get to be sad." So she did. From that night forward, she learned to smile through everything. Not out of fear, but because she believed calm was its own kind of power, that if she could stay composed, she could survive anything. She'd carried that same smile into every battle since. But now, looking at Ethan, she realized something new. Not all smiles are kind. Some are used like shields of superiority. His wasn't a smile of service. It was a smile of judgment. A guest walking past brushed her arm, bumping the table slightly. The glass wobbled, but didn't spill. He turned back, offering a faint apology. Sorry, I didn't see you sitting there." The words were light, but they struck deep. The narrator's voice lowered, soft and steady. Sometimes, being looked through hurts far more than being looked down on. Amara nodded slightly. "It's all right," she said. Then silence again. Her eyes found the clock on the wall. It was nearly 8. The friend she was supposed to meet had texted earlier, caught up at work. She smiled to herself, as if the universe had chosen to test her patience one more time. She exhaled slowly, fingers interlaced on the table. Across the room, Ethan was laughing with a group of guests, the light reflecting off the tray he carried. His face seemed to glow handsome, confident, proud. Yet there was no warmth in his eyes. How many times, she wondered, had people decided who she was just by looking? Her natural curls, her brown skin, her quiet way of speaking, they'd all been invitations for others to underestimate her. She remembered once, early in her career at a finance firm. When someone told her, "You talk like you know everything," she had smiled then, too, and replied, "No, I just know my worth." That response hadn't made her popular, but it had kept her grounded. Closing her eyes, she let the jazz music wash over her. Each note seemed to unlock another layer of memory, long nights building her company, boardrooms filled with doubt, endless meetings where she had to fight twice as hard to be heard. They hadn't seen her skill, her vision, only her gender and her color. And now, here she was, in the very place she had built, facing the same prejudice from one of her own employees. She breathed in deeply. Maybe this is the moment, she thought. Maybe this is when someone needs to relearn what respect means. But she stayed still. She knew some lessons didn't need words, only realization. Ethan approached again, hesitation softening his posture. "Ma'am, perhaps I should double-check the list for you." Amara lifted her eyes. Calm. Steady. "That's not necessary," she said gently. "I think I'll wait a little longer." He nodded, awkward, then walked off. Maybe it was her composure that unsettled him. People expect anger, they don't know how to handle silence. The narrator's voice came again. Silence, when it comes from the disregarded, isn't weakness, it's the sound of the world being forced to listen. Time slipped onward. Another waiter brought a small vase of lavender to her table, perhaps a quiet order from a manager, or maybe just pity. She nodded in thanks. The soft scent filled the space, making the air feel lighter. In the dim light, her face reflected faintly in the glass behind her, serene, composed, but undeniably strong. A soft gust swept through the restaurant, scattering a few receipts from the counter. Amara saw Ethan bend down to pick them up. When he rose, their eyes met for just a moment. Something flickered there, confusion, maybe recognition, as if he was beginning to sense that her calm wasn't submission. It carried weight, authority, power. Amara smiled faintly, knowingly, then looked back down at her phone. She scrolled through photos from the Elysian Room's opening night, 3 years ago, every face smiling, including Ethan's, standing in the back row. She remembered his interview. He had said, "I want to work somewhere that values class and real worth." She'd thought then, maybe he'll understand what real class means someday. Maybe she'd been wrong. Or maybe the lesson was still waiting to be taught. A passing guest paused beside her table. "You're still waiting?" they asked softly. "They haven't served you." Amara's lips curved slightly. "Oh, I've been served," she said. "Just not in the way they realize yet." The guest blinked, half confused, half moved, then nodded. "Good for you," they murmured. Time flowed on. Near 9 o'clock now. The restaurant began to thin out. Waiters cleared plates, checked receipts, stacked menus. Ethan passed by again, pretending to be busy. In the dimming light, Amara stood. The quiet scrape of her chair against the marble floor drew a few glances. She picked up her purse and stepped toward the center of the room. Her movements were calm, deliberate, the kind that made people notice without knowing why. Inside her, a decision had already been made. The narrator's voice deepened. Final. Some moments seem small, a woman standing after an hour of being ignored, but sometimes that's the exact second when the world begins to shift its gaze. Tonight. She said nothing, but the storm was already gathering, silent, precise, unstoppable. The room still chimed with clinking glasses and the laughter of guests satisfied with their lavish night out. But in the corner, Amara Williams rose quiet as a passing breeze. She adjusted her collar and tapped the old silver watch on her wrist, the last gift from her mother before she passed. Light flashed across the watch face, and for a heartbeat, she heard her mother's voice, drifting up from the past. "You can choose silence, Amara, but never let anyone believe silence means surrender." She drew in a long breath. The room seemed to go still inside her mind. Sound stretched thin, like a film slowed to half speed, leaving only the steady rhythm of her own breathing. She moved toward the host stand where Ethan Brooks was laughing with a few other guests. Each step rang clean against the marble floor. Heads turned, curious eyes followed. Ethan saw her coming. Annoyance flashed, quick and sharp. He kept a smile, but the corner of his mouth trembled. "Ma'am," he said, overly polite to the point of strain. "As I mentioned, we're very busy. Perhaps you could come back another time." Amara studied him for a long second. The stillness of it seemed to unnerve him. Then she spoke low and even, yet clear enough for those nearby to hear. Have you ever wondered why a woman would stay silent for an hour? Just to be seen? A few heads lifted. Ethan frowned. Confused. Ma'am, I don't understand what you're implying. She smiled. That's all right. I used to wonder, too, how someone could look through another person and feel nothing at all. The air tightened. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man, hurried over, hands raised as if to smooth the edges. His voice dropped to a nervous hush. We're very sorry if there's been any inconvenience. It seems there may have been a mix-up tonight. Amara turned to him, calm as a held note. A mix-up, she asked, soft as breath, weighted with truth. When one person is seated immediately, and another is ignored for an hour that isn't a mix-up, that's a choice. Silence fell deep. Total. Ethan's patience frayed. He lowered his voice, reaching for professionalism like a shield. Ma'am, I don't know what you're trying to say. If you're unhappy, we can ask you to leave. A small laugh escaped from a nearby table, not mocking, but stunned. No one could believe he'd said it. Amara's gaze didn't waver. She spoke slowly, each word landing with quiet precision. I don't need an invitation to stay. I already have my place here. I only want to see what kind of eyes you use to look at someone when you learn they're not where you assumed they were. Ethan's brow creased. What do you mean? She tilted her head, not answering right away. Then she stepped to a nearby table, slipped a slim black leather folder from her bag, and laid it open. Every gaze traced the movement of her hands. She turned the first page toward Ethan. The Elysian Room logo glinted at the top. Beneath it, Amara Williams, founder and owner. No one spoke. Ethan took a step back. Color drained from his face. The room froze. Silverware stopped. Only the music drifted, thin as a thread. When Amara spoke again, her voice was still gentle, but every syllable carried the weight of the room. You ignored me. You diminished me. You pretended I didn't exist. And the irony is, everything you're touching, every chair, every tablecloth, every bottle in the cellar, every light in this room belongs to me. She let the words settle, the way dust settles after a dropped plate. Ethan's lips parted, but no sound came. She stepped closer, steady, composed. You don't need to be afraid. I'm not here to humiliate you. I want you to understand. Respect isn't a favor you grant. It's an obligation. A single pair of hands began to clap. Then another. Then the room followed, soft but certain. Applause rolled over the marble like a tide. Ethan bowed his head, face flushed, eyes glassy. I didn't know, he whispered, voice trembling. I'm sorry. Amara regarded him, and her tone softened, but her clarity did not. No, Ethan, you knew. You just didn't care. And that's what you need to change. She turned to the manager, who stood stunned, eyes wide. You don't have to say anything, she told him. I didn't come to assign blame. I came to see the truth. The narrator's voice rose measured, resonant. Some people think power lives in giving orders. Real power lives in how we treat those with less. And some lessons are taught in silence until the truth finds its own voice. The atmosphere shifted, hollow pride dissolving into something humbler, cleaner. Ethan's head dropped lower. Thank you, he said hoarsely, for not yelling at me. I deserve it. Amara held his gaze, and the warmth in hers returned tempered, unwavering. I'm not yelling because I used to be you, she said. I've stood where you stand. I've been dismissed. I thought I had to pretend to be hard to be respected. But no. Ethan, respect comes from how you see people, not from where you stand. His throat worked around the lesson. Maybe in that moment, he understood that his failure wasn't just behavior. It was attitude. An older woman, one of the regulars, called out kindly, Young lady, you remind me that kindness still has a place in this world. Amara smiled and dipped her head. Not kindness, ma'am, just fairness. The chandelier's light skimmed her features, brightening the room as if the bulbs had warmed. Tension bled out of the air. A few staff members approached and apologized quietly. She nodded, no scolding, no speech. She looked across the dining room, eyes gentle but resolute. You can forget my face, she said evenly, but don't forget tonight's lesson. Respect is not an act of service. It is the foundation of humanity. The narrator closed the moment like a camera pulling focus. A voice doesn't need to be loud to matter. It only needs to arrive on time like a small flame in a dark room. And once that light appears, no one can go back to how things were. She turned and walked back to her table. where a glass of water had finally been set down. She lifted it and took a slow sip. The water was cold, but somehow it left warmth in her throat. Tonight, Amara had said what needed saying. What she didn't yet know is that the real wave was still gathering just beyond the shore. The air inside the Elysian room had not yet settled after Amara Williams' revelation. Guests sat frozen, half stunned, half in awe. No one spoke, but something in their eyes had changed. The room seemed to breathe differently, now slower, deeper, more real. Ethan Brooks stood motionless, his face drained of color. Her words still echoed in his head. Respect isn't a gift, it's an obligation. He had always thought being a waiter meant smiling at the right time, saying the right things, keeping things smooth. But tonight, he realized what he lacked wasn't skill, it was humanity. The restaurant manager, flustered, stepped forward. His voice trembled slightly. "Ms. Williams, on behalf of the entire staff, I deeply apologize. This was our failure." Amara gave a soft nod, her smile light as mist. "I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to see change." There was no anger in her tone, no condemnation, just truth. And somehow, that truth made everyone smaller. Some of the servers lowered their eyes. A few diners turned away, embarrassed. She didn't have to raise her voice. Her calm carried more weight than any shouting could. After a long moment, she turned to Ethan, her voice gentle but firm. "Take the rest of the night off. Come to my office tomorrow. We'll talk then." Ethan nodded, trembling slightly. "Yes, ma'am." The narrator's voice floated over the quiet, slow as a movie score. Not every failure is an ending. Some are beginnings if we have the courage to bow at the right time. Gradually, life returned to the restaurant. A few guests left quietly. Others stayed, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. But Amara said no more. She simply sat back down at her table, her half-empty glass before her, the golden light soft on her face like a halo of calm. In a shadowed corner, a man in a dark suit had been watching, his expression unreadable, his eyes cold. By the time Amara glanced his way, he was gone. She didn't think much of it, at least. Not yet. What she felt instead was a lightness, a quiet release. Not victory, not triumph, just a peace that came from knowing something had shifted. In her staff, in her customers, in the air itself. When she finally stood to leave, the room followed her with their eyes. Some smiled a small, genuine kind of smile. The kind that says thank you without words. Outside, the New York night greeted her with a chill wind. The city was alive, cars, lights, the hum of motion, but inside her, there was a different kind of silence. The silence that comes after a storm. A black sedan waited by the curb. Her driver, Daniel, hurried out to open the door. His voice was soft with concern. "Are you all right, Ms. Williams?" Amara smiled faintly. "I'm fine. Daniel, better than ever." As the car rolled through the city streets, lights flickered across the windows, each reflection another version of the city, another life passing by. Amara gazed out at the crowds, hundreds of faces moving through the night, strangers, rushing, distracted, and yet somewhere among them, she saw fragments of her younger self. She remembered all the times she hadn't been seen, when she'd been treated as invisible. Now, she wasn't just seen, she owned her voice. The narrator's tone softened. Reflective success isn't always standing at the top. Sometimes it's standing in the storm and keeping your kindness intact. The car turned onto a wider avenue. The streetlights painted lines of gold across her face. In her eyes, there wasn't pride. There was something lonelier, the kind of solitude that comes when you win by doing the right thing, knowing not everyone will celebrate that kind of victory. Her phone buzzed. On the screen flashed a familiar name, Charles Whitmore, her lawyer and longtime friend. "Amara." His voice came through deep and urgent. "I just saw the video. Someone in the restaurant filmed the whole thing. It's already everywhere. You're trending. You've become a symbol." Amara leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes. "I don't want to be a symbol, Charles. I just wanted to do what's right." Charles chuckled softly. "Symbols don't choose their timing. My friend, timing chooses them." There was a pause, the hum of the car filling the silence. Then Amara asked quietly, "Any backlash yet?" "Mostly support," he said. "But there are people who won't be pleased. Marcus Hale just posted something vague, but pointed about a woman who doesn't know her place." Amara opened her eyes. The name cut through the quiet like glass. Marcus Hale. The man who once tried to buy the Elysian room. The man who threatened to destroy her business when she refused. She exhaled, steady. He's never happy when someone stands tall without his permission. Charles hesitated. Amara, you know Marcus. He doesn't lose gracefully. You embarrassed him publicly. He'll make this personal. Be careful. Amara turned her gaze to the window. City lights flickered by heartbeats of gold and red in the dark. I've lived my whole life being careful. Charles, she said, maybe it's time I start living honestly. The car slowed to a stop outside her office building, a tall tower of glass and steel. Daniel looked back. Would you like me to wait, ma'am? She shook her head. No, thank you. I need a walk. The air was cool and damp. She stepped onto the pavement, the faint scent of rain and stone drifting through the night. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk, a quiet rhythm, steady and unhurried. For a moment, it was peaceful. But across the street, a man stood beneath a street lamp, half hidden in shadow. His hat tilted low, his coat collar raised. His eyes followed her as she passed. Then, as if on cue, he took out his phone and typed a brief message. She knows. The plan needs to change. The glow of the phone screen flickered once, then disappeared into the dark. No one noticed him. No one saw the shift that had just taken place. But it was there, the quiet turn of fate, the hinge between justice and danger. The narrator's voice deepened. The sound of a storm approaching sometimes. The light of justice burns too bright. And when it shines too far, those who live in shadow begin to move. The New York night stretched on beautiful, restless, full of secrets. Amara Williams walked forward, unaware that the evening's quiet victory had already lit the first spark of something much larger. A war of principles, power, and pride set to ignite beneath the same golden lights that once crowned her moment of truth. Morning came to New York wrapped in a veil of fog. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the tall windows of Amara Williams' penthouse, glinting off stacks of files and unopened envelopes on her desk. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. Notifications lit up the screen, tweets, headlines, messages from strangers across the world now speaking about her, for her, because of her. On the television, every news channel ran the same story. Black restaurant owner mistaken for a guest and discriminated against by her own employee. A modern lesson in respect. The viral video from last night played in endless loops. On screen, Amara stood tall, composed, her voice clear and firm. You don't need to be afraid. I'm not here to shame you. I just want you to understand, respect isn't a gift. It's an obligation. That voice, measured, unshaken, had become an anthem. On social media, hashtags exploded. Respect is power. Amara Williams. Elysian Room Incident. A woman tweeted, she spoke for every one of us who's ever been looked down on, but never lost our dignity. A father wrote, showed this video to my daughter this morning. Told her strength isn't shouting louder. It's standing tall when the world tries to make you small. Amara sat quietly, eyes on the glowing words. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just placed a hand over her heart, feeling its steady beat heavy, deliberate, real. The narrator's voice dropped low, deep, reflective. When an act of grace is seen by millions, it stops belonging to its maker. It becomes fire, and fire, no matter how beautiful, always burns. Her phone rang again. Charles Whitmore. Amara, he said, breathless. You're everywhere. CNN, NBC, the New York Times. They're all running the story. You've touched a nerve. People are starving for someone to remind them that dignity still matters. She spoke slowly. I didn't do it to make headlines. Charles. I did it so people remember how to treat each other. I know, he said. But remember, symbols attract enemies too. The words hung heavy. Amara rose and walked to the window. Down below, the street was packed reporters, photographers, flashing cameras. Paparazzi had already arrived. Across town, the Elysian Room sign shimmered brighter than ever. What was once a restaurant of elegance had become the epicenter of a social reckoning. Lines stretched down the block. People wanted to eat in the place where respect was served. But not everyone was applauding. In a high-rise office paneled with dark oak, Marcus Hale, the most ruthless investor in New York's hospitality scene, watched the same broadcast. His reflection flickered in the TV screen, half lit, half shadow. A cigar smoldered in his hand. Smoke coiled upward as he murmured, almost amused. She thinks she can turn herself into a symbol. Every symbol has a weakness. His assistant shifted uneasily beside him. What do you want us to do? Sir Marcus's smirk deepened. What we do best. When the world loves her, make them doubt her. The narrator's tone darkened. Silk over steel. In the world of the powerful, those who can't be bought are broken by rumor. At the Elysian Group headquarters, staff gathered around the conference table, eyes wide from the media frenzy. Reservation systems had crashed. Requests for interviews flooded their inboxes. Sales tripled overnight. But beneath the excitement ran an undercurrent of unease. A young employee whispered, "What if this isn't just publicity? What if it's the calm before a storm?" Charles arrived near noon, a thick folder in his hand. His expression was grave. "Amara," he said as he entered her office, "we have a problem. Someone's been trying to access your company's server's financial data, internal memos, even your personal schedule." Her gaze hardened. "Marcus Hale." He nodded. "Looks like it. And that's not all. He's hired a dirty PR firm. They're planning to spread a story that you're not the real owner of the Elysian Room, that you're just a figurehead backed by hidden investors." Amara's lips curved slightly, not in humor, but in recognition. He's playing the same old game. He doesn't understand I don't prove truth with words. Truth speaks for itself. Charles exhaled sharply. "You trust too much in fairness. Amara, the world doesn't run on fairness. When a woman of color stands tall, someone will always try to pull her down. Be ready." His words didn't scare her. They only deepened her resolve, because she knew when the light shines on you, the shadows always crawl closer. That afternoon, Amara returned to the Elysian Room. The air inside was different. Employees greeted her with new eyes, no longer distant, but respectful, even proud. Ethan waited by the entrance, not in uniform this time. He held an envelope in his hand. He stepped forward quietly. "Ms. Williams, this is my resignation. And thank you. Because of you, I finally saw who I'd become." Amara regarded him, calm but kind. "If you've truly learned what last night was about, Ethan, come back. Not to serve food, to learn how to serve people." His eyes widened. "You'd still give me a chance?" She nodded gently. "No one's born right. What matters is who's willing to change." The narrator's voice softened, almost like a sigh. "Forgiveness doesn't make us weak. It proves we're strong enough to choose the harder road." That night, back in her apartment, the city sprawled beneath her an ocean of lights. She sat at her desk, laptop open. Her inbox overflowed thank you letters, interview requests, sponsorship offers and threats. One email stood out. No sender name, no signature. Only one line. "You embarrassed them. They don't forgive." She read it twice, then again. No fear, just fatigue, the kind that comes from knowing the cost of truth. She closed her eyes and thought of her mother, of Brooklyn, of all the years between that diner and this skyline. The narrator's voice closed the moment, deep and still. The world will always test those who dare to be different. But once you conquer fear, nothing can take your peace. Storms only feel powerful to those who forget who they are. Amara stood and drew the curtains open. Below, New York glittered a restless constellation of ambition. Somewhere out there, Marcus Hale was smiling in the dark. And she stood still as glass before thunder. The night had only begun, and with it, so had the war. Manhattan never truly slept. The night air shimmered with gold, thousands of lights climbing into the sky, blurring into the mist until the whole city looked like a sea of fire and fog. Inside the 42nd floor of Hale Corporation Tower, Marcus Hale sat still before a wall of glowing screens. Headlines rolled across the monitors. Amara Williams, the woman who made New York rethink itself. One voice that changed an industry. He studied each line, the corner of his mouth lifting into a cold, deliberate smile. A soft snap of his fingers. The flame of a lighter caught the tip of a cigar. Smoke curled upward, thick and gray. "She's smart," Marcus murmured, voice low, almost admiring, but too clean. And in this world, clean people don't last. His chief of staff, Laura King, a sharp-eyed blonde in a tailored suit, stepped forward and placed a thick folder on the desk. "Everything's here, sir." They've been digging into her background, and I found a few things we can use. Marcus flipped it open. Inside, old contracts, tax filings from the early days of her first restaurant in Brooklyn, a few blurred photographs of a young Amara with her kitchen staff. "What am I looking at?" Laura leaned closer. "During her first years, she took investment from a private equity fund. Rumor says the fund's manager was later investigated for fraud. She pulled out early, but if the press thinks she's connected, They'll start asking questions? Marcus exhaled a line of smoke, eyes glinting. A little dust is all it takes to dull a diamond. The narrator's tone cut through. Quiet, but sharp. In the game of power, truth matters less than what people believe to be truth. Morning broke with a pale sun over Midtown. Amara Williams stepped into her office at the Elysian Group after an early television interview. She had spoken about leadership, equality, and the quiet strength of dignity. Her calm had moved the hosts. Her words, honest and warm, had reached millions. But when she opened her laptop, her screen flooded with messages. Amara, have you seen this? They're saying you were linked to a fraudulent fund. Be careful, they're going after you. A headline blinked across the page. Elysian CEO once tied to scandalous investment fund. Is her image as pure as it seems? Amara stared at it for a long time, then leaned back in her chair. The storm had arrived. Moments later, Charles Whitmore entered face-tight with worry. I assume you've seen it. Marcus is behind this. He's weaponizing the press. Amara's voice was calm. It's fine. The truth hasn't changed. I don't owe the world an apology for something I didn't do. Charles sat down opposite her, rubbing his temples. Don't underestimate him. Marcus owns half the outlets in this city. He doesn't have to prove you wrong. He just needs to make people wonder if you are. She said nothing. Her mother's voice echoed in memory. You can't control how they look at you, Amara. Only how you stand before them. Her answer came softly, almost to herself. I won't back down. At the Elysian Room, anxiety rippled through the staff. Some guests canceled reservations. Others left bitter reviews online. Adoration was turning into suspicion. Behind the host stand, Ethan Brooks scrolled through the comments on his phone. Maybe she staged it. Maybe the whole thing was a PR stunt. He clenched his fist. He remembered her face that night, steady, kind, without a trace of arrogance. He knew she wasn't the kind of person the headlines painted. That evening, he called a friend, a freelance journalist. I could prove she's innocent, Ethan said. I worked there. I've seen everything. She pulled out of that investment years before the scandal. The journalist listened, intrigued. Ethan sent emails, scanned documents, even shared signed copies of withdrawal papers showing Amara had cut ties with the fund long before it fell apart. Meanwhile, across the city, Laura stepped into Marcus's office again, surprise flickering in her eyes. Sir, an independent reporter is preparing a story. They claim they have proof Amara's clean. Marcus chuckled, unbothered. Let them publish it. When they do, we'll drop part 2. They don't realize they're dancing on my stage. The narrator's voice deepened, steady as a slow drumbeat. To fight a man who owns the story, you're not battling flesh and blood. You're fighting the belief of the crowd. Night again. Amara sat in her apartment, the TV humming in the background, words blurring into noise. Her phone pulsed with calls, alerts, invitations, warnings. She ignored them all. Outside her window, the skyline glittered as if nothing had changed, unaware that one woman's name was being dissected on every screen in America. She thought of her mother again, of the words that had once lifted her after a broken night in Brooklyn. You'll know how strong you are when the world turns its back, and you refuse to turn yours. A tear slipped free, more from exhaustion than fear. She wiped it away quickly. There was no time for weakness. She opened her laptop and began to type. The keys clicked slow, deliberate. Amara Williams, have never built my success on deception. I am not a symbol. I am a person, and every person deserves to have their truth seen. She sent the draft to Charles with a short note, release this at dawn. Then she shut the computer. The city below pulsed with its endless rhythm cars, sirens, lives intertwining like static. Inside that still apartment, Amara knew she had crossed a line. This was no longer about reputation. It was about faith, the fragile kind that held society together. The narrator closed the scene with a voice like distant thunder. Truth doesn't need to shout. It only needs to stand. But to stand in a world that worships lies, that is the war only the strong of spirit can fight to the end. Amara looked out the window. The glow of the city lit her face, fierce and resolute. Marcus had his empire money, media, power, but she held something rarer, dignity. And sometimes, dignity alone was enough to shake an empire to its core. Morning crept over Manhattan in a soft, silvery drizzle. Raindrops traced lazy lines down the glass walls of the Elysian Group headquarters, blurring the skyline into a watercolor of gold and gray. Inside the 25th floor conference room, Amara Williams sat quietly before a glowing screen. Charts and graphs filled it, declining reservations, stalled revenue, rising negative sentiment. The numbers spoke for themselves. And what they said was simple. Marcus Hale was winning. Charles Whitmore entered, a new file tucked under his arm. He set it gently on the table, studying Amara with that mix of concern and admiration only a true ally carries. "Amara, I know you believe silence can be powerful," he began. "But Marcus doesn't play by the rules. He's paying bots to spread lies, buying headlines, pushing your name down every feed. If you don't respond soon, people will start believing the worst." Amara didn't answer immediately. She turned to the window. The rain streaked across the glass, melting the skyline into liquid light. In that reflection, she saw her mother's face, calm, resolute. "You don't always have to shout." "Amara," her mother's voice echoed, "sometimes you make them listen by standing still." When Amara turned back, her eyes were clear, steady. "Charles," she said softly, "we will respond, but not with noise, with truth. Told the right way." Charles frowned. "What do you mean?" "We'll remind them who I am," she replied. "Not through the press, but through the people who've walked beside me. Let the story be told from the inside." That afternoon, she called Maya Johnson, a young filmmaker known for her raw, human documentaries. When Maya arrived, Amara spoke plainly. "I don't want a PR film. I want the truth unpolished, uncomfortable if it has to be. Film everything, my work, my staff, my doubts. No filters, no edits to make me look perfect." Maya studied her in silence for a moment, then nodded. "If you're brave enough to show your cracks," she said, "I'll show the light that shines through them." The narrator's tone softened. In a world of manufactured voices, sometimes the quiet truth travels the farthest. Filming began days later. Small cameras, a skeleton crew, Maya, and 2 assistants. They followed Amara into kitchens, meetings, and quiet corners of her day. They captured her greeting employees by name, checking the ovens, tasting sauces, laughing with the waitstaff. They filmed Ethan Brooks leading a new training session, his voice trembling yet sincere. "I used to see customers," he said. "Now I see people. Serving them isn't my job anymore. It's my respect." Maya's camera lingered on Amara as she listened, pride softening her features. For the first time in weeks, her smile was unguarded. That night, when the restaurant emptied, she stayed behind. The glow of the monitor washed over her face as she watched herself on screen, tired, flawed, human. "This," she whispered, "this is who I really am." Across town, under the golden haze of an East Side bar, Marcus Hale leaned back in his leather chair, a smirk curling his lips. "She's making a documentary?" he asked, voice dripping with disbelief. Laura King nodded. "She thinks authenticity will save her image." Marcus chuckled darkly. "Authenticity is a double-edged blade. When she opens her doors, we just have to push them wider. Plant someone on that crew, someone who can make sure the wrong footage leaks." Laura tilted her head. "I know just the person." The narrator's voice dropped to a near whisper. "While one soul fights to tell the truth, another waits to twist it. Justice has never been fair terrain, especially when truth becomes a weapon." 3 days later, Maya noticed something strange. One of her crew members, Rick, a technician hired last minute, kept asking about Amara's private schedule. He lingered near her office, copied drives when no one watched. Maya told Amara. Amara didn't flinch. "Don't stop him," she said quietly. "Let him think he's winning." That night, in the dim light of her office, Amara and Charles reviewed footage Rick had transferred. He'd sent an unfinished clip, an early behind-the-scenes cut, to an email traced back to Hale Corporation. Charles smirked. "So he wants leaks? Maybe we give him one." Amara nodded. "Let's show Marcus exactly what he wants to see." Together, they crafted a short, deliberate segment. In it, Amara spoke candidly about facing sabotage and betrayal, filmed to look like a private confession. They let Rick copy it. 2 days later, the leak appeared online, spread across gossip blogs and social media. But the reaction stunned everyone. Instead of outrage, the world responded with empathy. She knew someone was targeting her, and she stayed calm. That's grace. If they have to fake leaks to hurt her, that only proves she's right. Marcus watched the headlines tighten like a noose around his plan. His glass hit the table hard enough to rattle the ice. Laura shifted uncomfortably. Should I pull the story? He stared at the screen, jaw tense. No. Let it burn. She's won a round, but the game's not over. The narrator's voice wove through the silence. When malice runs out of lies, it clings to persistence. But hatred, no matter how patient, will never outlast conviction. 2 weeks later, Maya finished the documentary. She titled it, The Table of Respect. It opened with Amara standing alone in an empty dining hall, the soft hum of the city behind her. Her voice filled the screen, steady, vulnerable. They can take your reputation, but they can't take your worth unless you hand it to them. When the film premiered online, it spread like wildfire. Millions watched. People wept. They saw not a flawless icon, but a real woman, one who had stumbled, endured, and kept her grace intact. Ethan watched it in the staff lounge, tears streaking his cheeks. Charles smiled faintly as the audience at a private screening rose to their feet. And Amara. She sat alone in her office, city lights painting her face gold and silver. She didn't cry. She didn't celebrate. She simply breathed, because she knew the war wasn't over. But she also knew she was no longer fighting alone. Now, the truth had an army. The narrator closed the chapter, voice like a breeze through glass. Some victories aren't about defeating anyone. They come when you remind people of the humanity they'd forgotten. And sometimes, the loudest counterstrike is silence itself. Outside, New York shimmered against the rain. The reflection of its lights danced across Amara's face, half in shadow, half in fire. And there it was, the faintest smile. Not of triumph, but of understanding that to change the world, sometimes all you have to do is tell your story with heart. The city still blazed as if night itself had never existed. But for Amara Williams, every light glittering over Manhattan carried the same quiet question. Does light always save us, or sometimes destroy us? Her documentary, The Table of Respect, had spread farther than anyone imagined. Critics praised it, audiences shared it, social media overflowed with admiration. The image of Amara standing in an empty kitchen, speaking about dignity and respect, had become a cultural emblem, an anthem of grace, in an age of noise. But with fame came new eyes, ones that didn't admire. They measured, envied, waited. One morning, Amara walked into the Elysian Group headquarters and immediately sensed the air had changed. The staff spoke in hushed tones. The tension was palpable. Inside the boardroom, Charles Whitmore waited. A single black envelope rested on the table. He slid it toward her. Amara, he said quietly, this came in for you. No return address. She opened it. Inside was an old photograph, 15 years old. She was in a greasy diner uniform, holding a tray, her smile stiff but kind. On the back, scrawled in a familiar hand, we all come from the mud. Don't forget it. Amara stared at the photo for a long while. There was nothing shameful about it, yet she knew what it meant. It wasn't a reminder. It was a warning, an attempt to whisper, even light can be dragged through dirt. Charles narrowed his eyes. Marcus, he muttered, that tone, that smug Godfather threat. It's him. Amara folded the photo carefully, her voice calm. He's losing control. Charles, when the powerful start weaponizing someone's past, it's because they've run out of truth. The narrator's voice floated in, low and reflective. When light shines too brightly, it doesn't just reveal the darkness around us, it awakens the darkness within others. In the days that followed, the Elysian Room thrived. Revenues tripled. The waiting list stretched for weeks. People came not just to eat, but to take selfies, to post captions like, dining where respect began. But Amara felt a disquiet growing beneath the applause. She stood by the penthouse window, watching the line of eager customers below. Her reflection looked back at her half light, half doubt. What am I really fighting for? Charles, she asked softly. For people to understand respect, or to chase a trend wrapped in its name? Charles hesitated before answering. Maybe both, he said. You can't control the heart of the world. Amara, you can only stay true to yours. She nodded faintly, but she knew fame was a blade with two edges. The brighter she burned, the easier she was to wound. Across town, at Hale Corporation, Marcus Hale sat before a glowing wall of data, Lines and numbers pulsed upward, proof of Amara's meteoric rise. A consultant cleared his throat. "Sir, if she keeps this pace, she'll pull every ethical investor in the city. That could cut into our capital flow." Marcus's smirk was thin, dangerous. "Then we'll strip her of that virtue. Not with lies, those fade, but with truth, bent just enough." Laura King leaned forward, understanding instantly. "We leak that her staff was coerced into the documentary, that it was all an image play. It can't be proven false." Marcus stubbed out his cigar, eyes glinting. "Do it. Let them believe she's no different from the hypocrites she exposed." The narrator's voice slithered through the moment. "In the wars of media, truth doesn't need to be real. It only needs to be believed." Days later, the headline appeared, "Was the Table of Respect. Staged former staff claims they were forced to participate." The story spread like wildfire. Talk shows debated, commentators sneered, disgruntled ex-employees crawled out of the shadows, feeding the narrative. Fact blurred with fiction, and within 24 hours, the hashtag #JobsForRespect is a marketing was trending worldwide. Amara watched the news feed silently. Her face betrayed nothing, but inside, a dull ache bloomed not for herself, but for the truth she had fought for, now twisted into spectacle. Maya Johnson, the young filmmaker, rushed into her office, voice shaking. "Amara, they're saying I faked it, that I manipulated everything." I swear. Amara stood, resting a steady hand on her shoulder. "I know. Maya, you told the truth. We can't stop them from lying, but we can keep living like we believe what we said." That night, Amara walked alone across the Brooklyn Bridge. The wind bit against her skin, carrying the salt of the East River. The city stretched before her, a constellation of human ambition, blindingly beautiful, brutally indifferent. She stopped midway and looked out at the skyline. Her mother's words returned, gentle but unyielding. "If you choose to be the light, Amara, be ready to burn." A smile touched her lips, tired, but resolute. The narrator's tone dropped to a whisper. "Like rain, light isn't a reward. It's a burden. But only those who bear it without losing themselves truly shine." The next morning, Amara called an unannounced press conference. Reporters packed the hall. Cameras flashed. The crowd buzzed, ready for a defensive speech, a fight. But when she entered, she wore white. No jewelry, no anger, just calm. She stepped to the podium and spoke slowly, each word deliberate. "Heavy with truth, I am not perfect. I've never claimed to be. What I've tried to build is a place where people are respected even when they fail, even when they're fragile. If truth costs me my image, so be it. But I will never trade my integrity." The room fell utterly silent. No cameras clicked, no whispers stirred. Only her voice lingered steady, human, unbreakable. Within hours, the tide shifted. Online comments began to change tone. She doesn't need to prove anything. That calm, that's her truth. Sometimes the best defense of honesty is letting it stand alone. Across the city, Marcus hurled his glass against the wall, shards scattering like sparks. Laura stood frozen. Marcus's voice was low, venomous. "So, she wants to fight me with morality. Fine. Let's see how easily morality breaks." The narrator's closing words rolled in like distant thunder. Amara's light had spread across the city, but somewhere deep in its shadows, Marcus Hale was preparing the longest night. This time, he didn't just want her reputation. He wanted her soul. Outside, rain began to fall again. Each droplet struck the glass and fractured the neon glow into 100 trembling shards, beautiful, fragile, and cracked, just like the world she was trying to change. The rain had fallen all night. By morning, New York seemed heavier, soaked to its bones, like the sky itself had absorbed the weariness of the people below. In her high-rise apartment, Amara Williams sat before her desk, a cup of coffee gone cold. She hadn't touched it. On her computer screen, hundreds of emails piled up, praise, criticism, adoration, suspicion, all blurring together into a noise that pressed against her skull. She shut the laptop. Silence. The narrator's voice drifted in, slow and hollow, like wind through a cracked window. When light grows too bright, people no longer see clearly who is real and who is not. And sometimes, the one standing closest to you is the hand that pushes you into the dark. Charles Whitmore entered, rain still clinging to his coat. He held a folded newspaper. On the front page, Amara's face. Below it, the headline read Amara Williams' hero, or just a brilliant actress? She glanced at it, then smiled faintly. They love building statues, she murmured, just so they can have the pleasure of breaking them. Charles sighed, pulling out a chair. Amara, I've been looking deeper into Marcus's media network. There's something you need to hear. She looked up. His eyes were different this time, heavier, hesitant, carrying a truth he didn't want to speak. There's someone in your team, he said quietly, leaking information to him. The air thickened. The only sound was the rain tapping at the glass. Amara's voice was soft. Are you sure I have proof? Charles replied. Internal emails copied and sent to an encrypted address traced back to Hale Corporation. The sender is Kevin Moore. The name hit her like a cold wind. Kevin, her operations assistant, her right hand for 4 years, the man who stayed up nights helping her draft her first contracts, who celebrated every small victory beside her. She froze for a long moment. Maybe you're mistaken. Charles met her eyes, firm but kind. Amara, I know you trust people, but sometimes it's trust that leaves the deepest wounds. She didn't answer, just turned toward the rain, watching the droplets slide down the glass slow, relentless, cold. That evening, long after everyone had gone home, Amara stayed in her office. The golden lamplight caught the quiet tension in her face. The door creaked open. Kevin stepped inside. You're still here, he asked, voice casual, gentle, too gentle. She nodded. Just finishing some reports. He placed a folder on her desk. I've organized the files you requested. Amara's eyes met his calm, unreadable. Kevin, may I ask you something? Of course, ma'am. Do you ever think loyalty isn't proven by words, but by choices? A flicker crossed his face, barely visible. But she saw it. The slight hesitation, the shadow of guilt behind his eyes. What do you mean, he asked, trying to steady his voice. Amara stood, circling the desk slowly. I don't want to believe it, but evidence doesn't lie. You've been sending company files to Marcus Hale? Kevin stepped back, his face pale. I didn't mean to hurt you. They promised to invest in our expansion if I helped. I thought it was just business. I didn't think it would go this far. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Her voice was low, even carrying no anger, only sorrow. You forgot the one thing that makes all this worth doing. Kevin, money can buy chances, but it can never buy back trust. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm sorry, Amara. I didn't know what else to do. She rested a hand on his shoulder, her touch light as air. I forgive you, but you have to leave. Tonight. When the door closed behind him, the silence that followed was heavy. Amara sat down, fingers interlaced, her gaze distant. There was no hatred in her eyes, only the quiet ache of someone who finally understood even the most loyal hearts can lose their way. The narrator's voice returned, soft and mournful. Trust is like glass. You can piece it back together, but the light passing through it will never be the same. Charles came later that night. When she told him, he said nothing for a long while. Finally, he sighed. You could press charges, Amara. You'd win. She shook her head. I won't turn what's right into revenge. Let him go. We move forward. The next morning, Marcus opened an email. Just 2 lines. Your man is gone. Thank you for reminding me what real loyalty looks like. You. Marcus read it slowly, then smirked, though a chill glimmered in his eyes. She thinks forgiveness makes her strong, he said softly. I'll make sure her kindness becomes her weakness. Across the desk, Lord King asked cautiously. What's your next move? Marcus's gaze sharpened. Predatory. Hit her where it hurts most. Not her money. Not her fame. The people she loves. The narrator's voice darkened, low as thunder rolling across the skyline. When power can't win through reason, it turns to cruelty, and cruelty always aims for the heart. That night, Amara drove home late. Rain streaked across her windshield in silver ribbons. Then she noticed the headlights. A black SUV followed too close, too steady. She turned left. It followed. She accelerated. So did it. Her pulse quickened. When she veered suddenly down a side street, the SUV vanished into the fog, but the dread remained. She pulled over, breathing hard, rain whispering against the roof. In that fragile silence, She knew this was no longer just a war of headlines. It was now a war of survival. She picked up her phone and typed a message to Charles. I think Marcus just crossed a line. From now on, we move before he does. The narrator's final words fell like a slow drumbeat, both warning and promise. When darkness feels cornered, it no longer hides. It strikes, but it's within that very darkness that true light burns its brightest. The last image of Amara standing alone in the middle of the wet street, the city's neon glow reflecting in her eyes no longer belonging to a woman merely defending herself, but to one ready to face the entire world. Dawn draped a thin veil of mist over Manhattan streets. The city was still awake, still humming, but something in the air felt slower, heavier. Inside the 25th floor of the Elysian Group, Amara Williams stood by the window, staring down at the endless line of cars below. Outside, the sky had turned the color of steel, thick, expectant, like the moment before a storm. She held a cup of coffee, her hand trembling slightly. The exhaustion in her eyes wasn't from sleeplessness. It was from knowing that the fight had reached a place where there was no turning back. The darkness had come too close, and now it was time for the light to speak. The narrator's voice rose, soft but resolute. There are times when silence is the sharpest weapon, but there are also moments when silence becomes the accomplice of injustice. Charles Whitmore entered, carrying a thick folder. His expression was grave, but carried a flicker of hope. Amara, he said, we can bring Marcus down legally. I've found the flaw in his financial network. Hale Corporation has been laundering money through fake charities. If we file now, he won't have anywhere to hide. Amara took the folder. The title on the cover read Hale Corporation, Internal Financial Irregularities. She sighed, her voice low. Charles, I don't want this to become revenge. This isn't revenge, Charles said firmly. It's justice. He crossed the line. You told me once that respect means facing truth even when it's uncomfortable. Now it's your turn to live that truth. For a long moment, she said nothing. Rain began to fall, drumming against the glass slow, steady, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Finally, she whispered, All right, if we have to walk through the storm, let's walk with our heads held high. 2 days later, Charles and Amara's legal team filed a lawsuit in the New York State Court. By noon, every major outlet carried the headline, Amara Williams sues Hale Corporation for financial fraud. Across the city, in his dark wood office, Marcus Hale read the news in silence. His face was stone. Laura King, standing by his desk, read aloud nervously. Sir, if this case goes public, every account we've touched will be audited. We could lose everything. Marcus smirked. No one touches me. Laura, justice is bought by power, and I have plenty of that. The narrator's tone cut through the air like a cold blade, but Marcus had forgotten money can buy silence. It cannot buy back the trust of those he's broken. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson, the young filmmaker, made a decision. She released the unseen footage from her documentary Raw Interviews with former Hale employees, people silenced or fired for questioning Marcus's methods. The videos spread like wildfire, giving a face and a voice to the invisible victims behind the corporation's empire. At a press conference, a reporter asked Amara Williams, you're going up against one of the most powerful businessmen in New York. Aren't you afraid? Amara smiled faintly. Of course I'm afraid, she said. But I'm more afraid of the day my daughter asked me why I stayed silent when I knew someone was doing wrong. I don't want my answer to be, because I was scared. The room fell utterly silent. Her words echoed far beyond those walls, across television screens, across hearts. On the other side of the city, the fortress of Hale Corporation began to crack. Investors pulled out. Journalists dug deeper. Partners distanced themselves. Laura approached Marcus carefully. Sir, we can still negotiate. Pay her off. End this quietly. He slammed his glass down. No, if I bow, I'm no longer Marcus Hale. Get me every company tied to her. I'll make them bleed. The narrator's voice deepened, heavy with warning. When power feels threatened, it chooses the most dangerous path to destruction. D. That night, Amara sat alone by the window of her apartment. The city lights shimmered against the rain-streaked glass. Her phone rang. It was Maya. Amara, Maya said, her voice tense. Someone from inside Hale Corporation reached out. He says he has proof something that could end this. Amara's pulse quickened. Who? He only gave his first name, Daniel. Senior accountant. He said he can't live with the lies anymore. Amara hesitated for a moment, then answered, "Tell him I'll meet him, but only somewhere public." The next morning, Amara and Charles met Daniel at a small cafe near Central Park. He looked tired, worn down by years of complicity. He slid a small USB drive across the table. "In here," he said quietly, "are internal ledgers showing the shell foundations Marcus used to launder money through fake charity fronts." Charles narrowed his eyes. "Why help us now?" Daniel gave a weary smile. "I believed in Marcus once. He promised loyalty would be rewarded. Then I learned his favorite reward was betrayal. I just want to sleep with a clean conscience again." Amara's gaze softened. "You've done the right thing, Daniel, and that will always matter more than profit." The evidence went straight to the court, and for the first time, Marcus Hale received a summons with his own name on it. The story went national overnight. The narrator's tone grew solemn. Justice isn't the sound of a gavel. It's the echo in the hearts of those brave enough to speak. On the day of the hearing, Amara wore a soft gray suit. As she stepped out of the car, hundreds of cameras flashed. Inside the courtroom, she and Marcus faced each other across the aisle. He looked composed, but his hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his cufflinks. The judge asked, "Ms. Williams, why did you bring this case forward?" Her voice was clear, grounded. "Because respect isn't just how we treat customers. It's how we exist in this world. I don't want anyone to think justice is something to be bought." Outside, crowds gathered with signs that read, "Respect over power." When the hearing ended, Marcus exited through the side door. Reporters swarmed. "Mr. Hale." "Any comment?" someone shouted. He paused, looked straight into a camera, and smirked. "Justice," he said. "In this world, justice belongs to the highest bidder." The words hit the air like poison and turned against him instantly. Within hours, the quote went viral. Condemned by millions, investors fled. His empire began to crumble. The final image was of Amara standing on the courthouse steps as the rain began to fall. Drops clung to her hair, her suit, her hands, but her face was calm. She looked up into the gray sky and exhaled, as if releasing a weight she had carried for far too long. The narrator's closing voice came soft and certain, like the steady beat of hope itself. Justice doesn't rise from power, it rises from courage. And sometimes, it takes just one voice telling the truth to change the direction of the storm. New York woke to a sky dulled by a veil of gray, as if dust had settled over the morning. Every news feed blazed with the same story, the second hearing of Marcus Hale. From financial papers to primetime networks, his name sat beside heavy words: fraud, manipulation, money laundering, and betrayal of public trust. In his opulent office on Park Avenue, Marcus sat alone. No chatter from aides, no hurried footsteps. Even Laura King, his most loyal lieutenant, had called in sick a week ago. Major shareholders dropped off the morning's video call without so much as a goodbye. On his desk, an expensive clock ticked with clinical indifference, counting down for a man who once believed he was untouchable. Marcus stared into the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, the creases around his mouth deeper than ever. He muttered, "They think a few sheets of paper can take me down, Justice. It's just a well-staged play." But somewhere beneath the bravado, he knew this wasn't theater anymore. What waited outside had no director, no final cut, no mercy. The narrator's voice came low and cold. When a powerful man falls, no one blames the wind. They point and say, "That's the price of arrogance." Nice. Across town at the Elysian Group, Amara Williams and Charles Whitmore watched the live broadcast. The screen showed Marcus stepping from his car into a swarm of cameras, his face steady, his hands clenched. Charles glanced at Amara. He still believes he can walk away. Amara's reply was a quiet blade. That's the most dangerous delusion of those who've held power, thinking the world is still in their hands. In the courtroom, the prosecutor read an indictment that ran longer than 10 pages. Figures, bank names, transfer ledgers, all projected on a wide screen. Each line cut another stitch from the immaculate suit of the visionary investor Marcus had tailored for himself. He sat stone still, glancing now and then at his attorney's men who looked tired, burdened, and suddenly unable to meet his eyes. A witness took the stand, Daniel, the senior accountant. He carried a binder, his voice steady. "I once thought Marcus Hale was a model to follow. Then I realized his loyalty belonged only to money. I have evidence of 23 unlawful fund transfers over the past 2 years. Marcus gripped the arm of his chair so hard his nails broke skin. He held his poise, but his lips trembled. The narrator returned. Slow and unflinching. Power doesn't vanish in an instant. It sheds itself, word by word, truth by truth, until nothing remains but the naked shape of what it always was. When the hearing adjourned, the press surged forward, questions fired, lights flashed. Marcus pushed through them, snapping, "I'll be back. Don't think a man like me goes down over a few lies." But that night, when he reached his Hamptons estate, the house was dark. Staff were gone. Even the old butler who had served him for 20 years left a note, "I can't keep serving a man who respects no one but himself." Marcus sank into a chair and poured a drink. The sound of whiskey hitting crystal echoed through a room that suddenly felt hollow. His phone buzzed. "One new message, I told you. Marcus. Power without ethics is just violence wrapped in silk." Woo! He hurled the phone. The glass shattered. He gasped, staring at the sculptures, the paintings, the investor awards trinkets that had never weighed so little. The narrator's voice lingered, heavy with aftermath. No one defeated Marcus Hale. He did it himself with the very arrogance he mistook for strength. The next morning, the court ordered a full investigation into Hale Corporation. Accounts were frozen. Employees were subpoenaed. The press called it the biggest financial earthquake of the decade. Meanwhile, Amara sat in her office without celebration. She watched the news with a strange, quiet ache, not triumph, but pity. Charles said softly, "You accomplished what most said was impossible." Amara shook her head. "I never wanted someone to fall so others could stand. I wanted justice to be visible, so those who come after won't have to be afraid." The narrator breathed across the moment, light as a sigh. She didn't win by making someone lose. She won by keeping her soul clean in the dirtiest game. In the days that followed, Marcus's face flooded every screen not as a titan of finance, but as the emblem of a collapse. His stock plunged. His empire crumbled in weeks. One evening, Laura King arrived at Amara's door. She lingered a long time before stepping in. I'm sorry," she said, voice shaking. "I helped Marcus attack you. I told myself it was just work. But watching him fall, I realized I was losing myself, too." Amara's smile was small, real. "I don't hate you. Laura, some mistakes only need a wake-up call. If you want to start over, use what you know to help the people he hurt." Laura nodded, tears breaking free. The narrator's voice warmed, deep with grace. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing not to let the wound drive the rest of your life." Soon after, Marcus was taken into custody pending further investigation. Police arrived near midnight. He didn't resist. As the cuffs closed, he raised his face to the starless sky for the first time, feeling how small he truly was. On his way to the car, reporters pushed forward. "Mr. Hale, anything to say to Amara Williams?" Marcus paused, looked straight into a lens, and rasped, "She's won, but she'll learn soon. Light doesn't exist without the dark." The words fell like the final low note of a dying symphony. The closing image Amara before the window, the city laid out beneath her. The sky had cleared after the storm. The lights below no longer burned harshly. They glowed softer, like a reminder that some battles end not with noise, but with the awakening of conscience. And the narrator's last line settled like calm rain. The fall of Marcus Hale wasn't just the failure of one man. It was the victory of a belief that justice can still exist in a world crowded with power and deceit. Autumn in New York always carried a quiet kind of sadness. Golden leaves blanketed the sidewalks, and the wind held the chill of things left unsaid. For Amara Williams, this was the first season after everything had ended, or at least, that's what the world believed. The court had ruled. Marcus Hale was sentenced to prison, his fraudulent funds dismantled, Hale Corporation gone. The financial press called it a historic collapse. Headlines painted Amara as a symbol of courage, of justice, of integrity. But inside her quiet apartment, she felt no victory, only emptiness. The narrator's voice drifted in, soft as breath through glass. When the storm passes, people expect the sun to appear, but sometimes all that remains are the ruins of what once was. Late in the afternoon, Charles Whitmore stopped by with a bottle of wine and his familiar warm smile. "You should be celebrating. Amara," he said, "you changed the system." She gazed out the window, where sunset spilled orange light across her face. "I never wanted to change the system, Charles. I just wanted people to treat each other better. But the more I tried to fix things, the more I realized maybe the world is just tired of what's right." Charles sat beside her, his tone deep, gentle. "Justice isn't a cure, Amara. It's only the first step. What comes next is forgiveness. She was silent for a long time. Forgive who? Charles Marcus. The people who betrayed me. Or myself for letting it all go this far. The narrator's voice sank, tender and haunted. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's standing face to face with your own pain. Oh. The next morning, Amara visited Laura King at a community center for victims of financial crimes. Laura, now a volunteer, looked startled when Amara appeared in the doorway. I didn't think you'd ever come, Laura said softly. Amara smiled, calm and kind. I didn't come to relive the past. I just wanted to see how you're doing. Laura lowered her eyes. I used to believe being successful like Marcus was enough, but I never understood what real value meant. Because of you. I'm learning. Amara placed a hand on her shoulder. Everyone has a path back. What matters is that you took the first step. The narrator's tone warmed, like an ember still glowing. Forgiveness isn't a gift we give to others. Sometimes it's the grace we grant ourselves just to breathe in peace again. Meanwhile, in a federal prison upstate, Marcus Hale sat in the visitation room as rain tapped the windows. The door opened. The woman who walked in took his breath away, Amara. She wore a long coat, her eyes steady, calm. Marcus's voice was rough. So, you came to savor your victory? Amara's reply was slow, deliberate. I came to tell you, I don't hate you. Marcus laughed, brittle and hollow. You've already won. You've got everything: justice, fame, the respect of the world. What more could you want? Not that, she said softly. I came because I don't want to carry hatred anymore. It's heavier than any sentence. He stared at her, something fragile flickering behind his eyes. For a moment, words failed him. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, I was wrong. Amara, what I regret most isn't losing money. It's never understanding what you did. Real power isn't making people bow. It's giving them a reason to stand tall beside you. Amara rose, meeting his gaze. I hope one day you find peace too. The guard opened the steel door. The lock clanged shut behind her. Marcus remained there, motionless under the dim yellow light. And for the first time, he didn't see himself as a victim of the world, but as a man who had thrown himself into the abyss. The narrator's voice came like a closing whisper. Forgiveness doesn't change the past. It simply opens the road forward. Months later, Amara returned to the Elysian Room. The restaurant had been renovated, brighter now, yet still carrying the same warmth. That evening, she decided to serve dinner herself, not as a CEO, but as a waitress again. When she stepped out with a tray, a group of guests recognized her and stood to applaud. She smiled. Thank you, she said. But tonight, I'm just here to serve the same way I started. An older guest looked at her with misty eyes. You make me believe kindness still exists. Amara nodded gently. Kindness never left. It just waits for someone patient enough to keep it alive. That night, after the restaurant emptied, she stayed behind. The candle on her table flickered softly as the wind pressed against the windows, carrying the first hint of winter. She opened a small notebook. On the last page, written years ago, were the words, Respect isn't an action. It's a choice repeated every day, even when no one is watching. Amara smiled, closed the book, and blew out the candle. In that moment, she wasn't a symbol, or a hero, or a survivor. She was simply a woman who had walked through storms and chosen, finally, to walk in peace. The narrator's closing voice came slow, deep, warm as the fading glow of dusk. Justice may earn the world's admiration, but only compassion brings people closer. And sometimes, the strongest thing we can ever do is forgive. The morning in Brooklyn was unusually peaceful. Soft sunlight spilled through the window, glinting off a cup of coffee still steaming on the table. Amara Williams sat quietly, her hair falling loose over her shoulders, eyes drifting toward the street where people laughed, walked, and lived their ordinary lives. She was no longer rushing from meeting to meeting, no longer surrounded by microphones or camera flashes. She was simply a woman relearning how to breathe in a world that had finally grown quiet again. The narrator's voice rose gently, like a breeze slipping through a half-open window. After every storm, the sun doesn't rush to shine. It waits until the human heart is calm enough to see that it's still standing. A year had passed since the trial that changed everything. The Elysian Room still stood, but it had transformed. Amara had stepped back, entrusting the restaurant to a new generation led by Maya Johnson, the young filmmaker whose first documentary had touched millions. Now Maya wasn't just a storyteller, she was a mentor, helping train young employees in empathy, service, and respect. That morning, Maya stopped by Amara's apartment, carrying a folder. "Amara," she said brightly, "I just finished the proposal for our new project, Second Chance. It's a program to help people who've been shut out of the workforce because of their past mistakes." Amara flipped through the pages, smiling. "You still remember what I told you last year?" Maya nodded, eyes warm. "Of course. You said, sometimes a second chance is the only way people can live their first one honestly." They laughed softly together. Between them, there was no longer the formality of boss and employee, only two women who had endured pain, learned grace, and found peace in giving it back. The narrator's tone grew low and tender. Some wounds don't need bandages. They just need to be seen and given a chance to heal. At that same time, far north in a federal prison, Marcus Hale was shelving books in the prison library. He had lost weight. His hair had gone gray. The arrogance that once clung to him was gone. Now, he read. He wrote letters, and sometimes just sat quietly, watching the afternoon sunlight fade through barred windows. In one letter addressed to Charles Whitmore, Amara's attorney, Marcus wrote, "I used to think justice existed only to punish, but when everything was stripped away, I realized true justice starts within. I don't ask for forgiveness, but if there's another life, I hope I'll learn to listen before I speak, and to respect before I judge." Charles handed the letter to Amara later that week. When she folded it shut, her expression was a blend of sorrow and serenity. "He's changing," she murmured. Charles nodded. Maybe failure is the only beginning left for those who've forgotten who they are. That evening, Amara returned to the Elysian Room for the first time in months. The restaurant glowed softly, jazz music curling through the air. New faces greeted her, young, diverse, confident. She saw herself in their eyes the same hope, the same pride she once carried. As she walked past the tables, she paused near a middle-aged couple laughing together. The woman said to her husband, "Do you notice everyone here smiles? Like they actually care?" Amara smiled too. That was all she'd ever wanted, to create a place where people felt seen and valued, not because of wealth or status, but because they were human. Maya approached and whispered, "Amara, tonight I want to show something special." The lights dimmed. On the restaurant's main screen appeared an old video of Amara standing outside the courthouse, speaking about justice and respect. It was the same clip that had once silenced the world. This time, no one applauded. They simply listened, quietly, reverently, like hearing truth itself breathe. When it ended, Amara turned away, brushing a tear from her eye. Maya leaned close and said softly, "You didn't just build a restaurant. Amara, you built faith." The narrator's voice returned, calm and full. Faith, something that cannot be bought or sold, but can live forever when planted with kindness. The next morning, Amara received a letter from a prestigious university. They invited her to speak to business students about ethics and modern leadership. She accepted. The lecture hall was filled with more than 500 students. Amara didn't bring notes. She just spoke from memory, from heart. She told them about a woman once ignored in a restaurant, about the humiliation that became a turning point, and the long, painful climb toward proving that respect is not a privilege, it's a human right. Her voice softened. "There were days I wanted to quit, but then I realized if I walked away, I'd leave space for someone else like me to face the same injustice. So I stayed, not because I was strong, but because I knew what weakness felt like." The hall fell utterly silent. When she finished, no one clapped right away. Instead, the entire audience rose quietly to their feet, an unspoken gesture of respect that meant more than applause ever could. Afterward, Amara stepped outside onto the red brick path. The autumn wind moved through her hair as she looked up at the wide, open sky. For the first time, she felt light, truly light. Peace had finally found her. The narrator's voice deepened, rich with renewal. The light after the storm isn't the sun. It's the glow that lives inside us when we choose compassion over bitterness and rise not for vengeance, but for grace. That night, back in her apartment, Amara turned on an old radio. A jazz tune filled the room, the same song she used to listen to with her mother. She closed her eyes and smiled. Outside, the city was still noisy, but inside her heart, there was only calm. On her desk sat 2 photographs, one of her younger self in a waitress uniform, and another of her with a new team at the Elysian Room, all of them smiling. She looked at them both and whispered, "I've come a long way, but what I'm proudest of is that I'm still me." The narrator's closing words flowed like the final warmth of evening light. She was once ignored, underestimated, humiliated. She fought, she forgave, she healed, and in the end, the world didn't remember her for the storm she survived, but for the light she left behind. Years had passed since the day Amara Williams first stepped into the Elysian Room as a forgotten customer. New York City still gleamed as it always had, the towers stretching toward the sky, the streets buzzing with life, stories, and noise. But somewhere in that endless current of motion, something had quietly changed. People had begun to look at each other differently. A glance, a thank you, a small gesture of respect, things that seemed so simple, yet carried the weight of everything Amara had once sown. The narrator's voice rose, soft and golden, like the first wind of spring. People often think legacy means buildings, companies, or numbers. But for Amara, her legacy was how people treated one another after she was gone. One bright morning, Maya Johnson stood on stage at the Women of Leadership Conference, a gathering of some of the most influential women in America. She was speaking about Amara Williams, the woman she called the quiet teacher of a generation. Maya's voice was calm but clear. "Amara didn't teach me how to win. She taught me how to win without losing my humanity." She said, "If you have to step on others to climb higher, that summit isn't worth reaching." The auditorium fell silent. Some people took notes. Others simply bowed their heads. When Maya finished, the crowd stood not just for Amara, but for themselves, for the reflection of who they wanted to be. Afterward, a young journalist approached Maya. "Why do you think Amara's story still endures?" she asked. Maya smiled. "Because she never tried to become a legend. She just tried to live kindly. And when someone lives with that much sincerity, the world will tell their story for them." Meanwhile, in Chicago, a new restaurant chain had opened Grace Table, inspired by Amara's philosophy. A wooden sign outside read, "Every seat here is equal." The staff came from every background and different ages, colors, pasts. Many had once been rejected elsewhere because of appearance, mistakes, or circumstance. But here, they were welcomed. When customers asked who created the idea, the staff would answer with quiet pride, "Amara Williams. She gave us a chance to become better people." The narrator's tone deepened, gentle and reflective. "Some people don't need to stay with us forever. They just need to touch our hearts once, and we'll never be the same again." One golden afternoon, Charles Whitmore visited Amara at her small cottage by the Hudson River. He was retired now, hair turned silver, his smile as kind as ever. They sat on the porch, watching sunlight scatter over the water. "The world needs more people like you, Amara," Charles said. She chuckled softly. "I think the world just needs more people who listen instead of judge." They fell quiet, the sound of the waves their only company. Then Charles pulled an envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. "It's for Marcus." Amara hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a short letter, the handwriting uneven but heartfelt. "Amara, I'll be released soon. I don't know if you'd want to see me not to apologize, but to thank you. Because of you, I've learned that sometimes failure is God's way of giving us a second chance." Her eyes shimmered as she folded the letter. "He's changed," she whispered. Charles nodded. "You gave him something no law or fortune could awakening." "Ma'am, meets." A month later, Amara agreed to meet Marcus. They met in a small cafe, no cameras, no press. Marcus looked older, thinner, his once iron posture softened by humility. When he saw her, he smiled. "Thank you for coming." Amara nodded. Not everyone has the courage to face their past. "Marcus, you did. I respect that." He lowered his gaze. "I used to think victory meant having everything. Now I just want to live well enough not to hurt anyone again." For a while, they sat in quiet. Then Amara said softly, "Maybe what matters isn't that we were wrong once, but who we choose to become once we know we were." Marcus gave a faint smile. "You're right. And thanks to you, I finally know my choice." The narrator's voice settled low and steady. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply stops the past from steering the future. A year later, Amara was invited to speak at Columbia University's graduation ceremony. This time, her speech wasn't about victory or justice. It was about kindness. "There's one thing I've learned," she said, her voice calm but resonant. "Success isn't measured by how many people you surpass, but by how many you lift along the way." The hall erupted into a standing ovation. Students, professors, even those who had followed her story for years, they weren't just hearing a speech. They were witnessing something living inside themselves. After the ceremony, a young black student approached her, tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Williams? Your story makes me believe I can do something good too." Amara took her hand, smiling. "Don't just believe. Dear, begin. Every time you treat someone with respect, even with a smile, you're already changing the world." The narrator paused, letting the words breathe. Some legacies aren't carved in stone. They live in the human heart and spread like a flame that never dies. That evening, Amara returned home and opened her old notebook. On the last page, she wrote, "If anyone asks what I left behind in this world, tell them I left a seat for everyone." The light from her house spilled across the porch, the wind moving softly through the trees. The story of a woman once ignored who became a symbol of empathy and grace was no longer a headline. It had become part of the city's soul. And the narrator's final voice, tender as twilight, whispered, "The world doesn't need more heroes. It just needs more Amara's people brave enough to choose kindness, even when the world has not been kind to them." The sky over New York was bathed in a soft orange glow. Sunset spilled down the glass towers, turning the city into a mosaic of shimmering memories. In a quiet corner of Manhattan, the Elysian room carried on as usual. Laughter rippled from the tables. A piano hummed gently in the background. But tonight, something was different. A new portrait hung on the wall, Amara Williams, smiling softly, her eyes calm, deep, and serene. Beneath it was a small inscription, "To the woman who taught us that respect is the finest form of service." The narrator's voice entered, low and steady like the final note of a long, beautiful song. Most stories end when a door closes. But for Amara Williams, every door she closed opened something better for the world. 3 years had passed since she stepped away from leadership. Now, Amara lived quietly in a small seaside town in Maine, a wooden house perched on a gentle slope overlooking the ocean. Each morning, she brewed a cup of coffee and opened the window to breathe in the salt air. She was no longer CEO Amara Williams. She was just Amara, the friendly neighbor who taught local kids how to cook and told them stories about life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Maya Johnson arrived with a small, elegant invitation in hand. "Amara," she said, eyes bright, "Columbia University just announced a new scholarship in your name. The Amara Williams Fellowship for Inclusive Leadership. They want you there for the launch ceremony." Amara set down her teacup, smiling. "A scholarship. For the next generation," Maya nodded. "Yes, for young students of color, with ideas to change the world through compassion, just like you did." Amara gazed out the window at the sunlit waves. Her voice was soft, but full of wonder. "You know, Maya, I never thought my life would reach this far. All I wanted was for one server to understand that respect isn't optional, it's a duty." Maya smiled through tears. "And you made the world understand that." The narrator's voice followed, deep and tender. The greatest changes often begin in the smallest acts. A word, a glance, a gesture. But when they're done with sincerity, they can become a lighthouse for generations to come. The ceremony took place a week later on Columbia's campus. Hundreds of students, professors, activists, and business leaders filled the hall. When Amara stepped onto the stage, the crowd rose to its feet, not in applause, but in reverent silence. She looked out over them, her expression calm, radiant. "I used to be a waitress." She began. "And one day, I was ignored, not because I made a mistake, but because I didn't look like them. That day, I was angry. I was hurt. But I also understood I had two choices to get even, or to make something good out of the pain. I chose the second, because only light can make darkness disappear. From the front row," Maya wiped her eyes. A young man nodded quietly, understanding every word. Amara continued, her voice warm and slow. The world doesn't change when we shout louder. It changes when we listen deeper, when we choose kindness, even when others don't. For a long moment, the hall was still. Then the applause came not wild, but powerful, steady, heartfelt, like a wave rising and falling together. The narrator's voice followed, soft and contemplative. People may forget what you said. They may forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. After the ceremony, Amara walked out into the golden dusk. At the gate, a group of students ran up to her, asking for a photo. A young white woman spoke shyly. I'm not a person of color, but I've been judged for how I look. Your story makes me want to be better, not just for myself, but for others. Amara smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. You already are the light. Just keep shining. That night, she sat by the window of her hotel, gazing down at the city lights below a constellation of human stories. She thought of everything the night she'd been ignored in that restaurant, the battle with Marcus Hale, the moment she learned to forgive. Each memory flickered through her mind, not as pain, but as gratitude. The narrator's voice came, smooth and resonant. Some must walk through pain to learn how to heal. Some must lose everything to see that the most precious thing they ever had was kindness. A year later, Amara left New York for good. She moved south to Charleston, a small coastal city where the sun was warm and people greeted each other by name. She opened a modest coffee shop called Kindred, no ads, no luxury, just a space for stories, for listening, for human connection. On the main wall hung a single wooden sign. Here, every story matters, every day. People came bringing tales of loss, hope, and new beginnings. And Amara listened sometimes with a smile, sometimes with tears. No one called her CEO anymore. To them, she was simply Miss Amara, the woman who brewed the best coffee in town and had a way of making everyone feel seen. One quiet evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, she sat outside her cafe, listening to the waves. Her phone buzzed a message from Maya with a short video attached. It was a student film titled The Woman Who Turned Pain into Light. Amara laughed softly through tears. She whispered to the wind, Light, if you're still here, go further than I ever could. The narrator's voice filled the silence. Warm and lingering, Amara Williams left this world the way she lived, quietly, kindly, with strength that needed no spotlight. But her story didn't end. It lives on in every listening heart, every act of gentleness, in every person who once felt invisible and learned to see their own worth. The final sound was the hush of the sea breeze, and a voice barely above a whisper spoke the last line. Because respect isn't just how we serve others, it's how we serve our own soul. The story of Amara Williams is not just about restoring justice. It's a timeless reminder of the power of compassion and respect. In a world clouded by prejudice, sometimes all it takes is a look, a tone, or an attitude to make someone feel small. Yet, it was the way Amara chose to respond with calm, grace, and empathy that transformed pain into strength and turned her into a symbol of humanity. She didn't win through power, she won through kindness. Her life teaches us this simple truth. Respect is not an act, it's a choice, one we make every single day, even when no one is watching. We've all been judged, hurt, or tempted to give up. But Amara's story reminds us that forgiveness is not weakness. Humility is not surrender. And kindness true. Unwavering kindness is the greatest strength a human being can possess. If each of us listened a little more, respected a little deeper, and treated others a little gentler, this world would be a far softer place to live in. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you believe, as Amara did, that respect and compassion can change the world, leave a comment, hit like, share, and subscribe so together we can keep spreading stories that bring hope, emotion, and faith in humanity. Because the next story might be yours, and the world deserves to hear it.